Good morning, everyone. My name's Alessia, and this is Chad, and we're from the Adler Community Health Services. So we're your wellness team at St. Paul's and other PHC sites. So we're happy to be presenting a series of webinars. We're going to be starting with this week's, which is separating life and work, increasing your motivation and energy. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for tuning in. We'll get started.
So initially we wanted to present a webinar that helps everyone separate life and work, maintaining a work-life balance, and how to be productive when you want to be productive. So starting off with a quick exercise. There you go. I want everyone to grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, and we'll do this exercise with you. So
give you a couple minutes just to get those ready.
Yeah. And the exercise is on the slides here, but we'll go through them step by step, starting with step one. So I have my paper and my pen handy with me. We'll just go right ahead. So first off, I want you guys to bring to awareness what a typical day looks like for you. This might mean an average of all of your days during the week, or just one day that you think is like what defines typically what your work week looks like. It could also be a day where you're off, it could be a weekend. So with that in mind, keeping that in awareness, and think about what that typical day looks like for you. With your pen and your paper, I want you to list all of the significant activities that you do throughout this particular day. And that could be as very specific, or it could be as very general as possible. And it's really up to you. So this is where you get to reflect on what that day looks like, and then really look into which activities you do throughout the day. Just to give an example, I wake up at 7, so I'm going to start my day at 7 o'clock. First thing I usually do is check my phone, and then check my emails, get up, do my bed, make some coffee, eat breakfast, and then I list all of my activities until 7 o'clock, until around 10:30 is usually when I go to bed. So that gives you a flavor, an example of what activities we're trying to look at here. So go ahead and start that right now. For people who still have to get their pen and papers ready, we'll give you guys an extra 2 or 3 minutes. So this step 2 will be about 10 minutes altogether, okay? Or maybe 5.
For those who have just joined us, we're just starting off with an exercise, going through what a typical day looks like. So we're just at step 2 right now, which is listing all the significant activities you do throughout the day. So that could look like just what time you wake up at, what you do after you wake up. It could be driving or walking to work, calling a family member, work itself. So any of those things.
So I'll give it about an extra 3 more minutes. And if you're straggling behind, You can do this activity at another time as well. We'll have a lot of time in between, so don't worry. Now, I'm not sure where everyone is on the activity, but I'm going to ask you, Alessia, how are you doing with it?
I'm good. I'm almost all the way through, so maybe an extra minute. And I think a couple more people have just joined us. So for those that have just joined us, again, we're just working on this exercise here. So we're on step 2. We're listing all the significant activities we do throughout the day, including waking up, getting to work, working out, different things like that. And if your days differ, so if you have kind of different schedules each day, or you're thinking about that your weekend looks different, you can also just, it doesn't have to be in chronological order. You can just kind of list off different activities that you would do on either a typical day or even on the weekend, because we're going to move to the next step, which is then labeling these activities. I think we can move to that step now, Chad.
Sure. So if you've finished the step 2, I want you to take a look at each activity and label them as something that is either nourishing. So what I mean by nourishing is that this activity gives you energy. It gives you sort of, yeah, energy. I'm just gonna leave it at that. This activity, another activity can be also depleting. So it takes away energy. And if you can't decide between the both, or you just don't know, just say neutral. So for me, an example of something that's nourishing, that gives me energy is going to the gym. Although that's kind of counterintuitive because, you know, I'm using a lot of energy at the gym, but it's something that actually just nourishes me. It makes me feel good. It makes me, it just gives me a lot of energy. Something that's depleting is answering emails. It's important, but I have to do it. And so it takes away a lot of energy from me. And as much as I hate to admit this, but neutral is when I eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner. It's just something that I just have to eat for the calories. And again, it sounds like it's nourishing, but it's something that I see as neither nourishing or depleting. So these terms, they're not good or bad. We're not labeling it as such. We're just labeling it as either something that gives us energy or something that takes away energy. So I want to invite you now to take a look at each activity and label it as such. And I'll give you guys like 3 minutes or 2 minutes.
As I'm going through these, I'm just noticing that some of them I find depleting some of the times and nourishing other times. And that's okay. So I think, like, for me, I'm thinking about work, and sometimes at the end of a work day, I feel really nourished and great. And other times I feel depleted and exhausted. And I mean, that's okay. I wouldn't say it's ever neutral, but yeah, I think depends the day too.
Yeah.
I think some of the things here are just always nourishing or always depleting. So just noticing that.
All right. Um, in terms of the next step, what I want you guys to do, what I invite you to do is tally up all of those activities. So under one category, how many nourishing activities do you have? Tally up how many neutral ones you have and how many depleting ones you have, and come up with a total number for each. So Alessia, you said, you mentioned earlier that context is very important when you're reflecting on these things, on reflecting on each activity. And that sometimes your workday can be depleting. And even that workday alone, or like whatever the activity is for work, depending on what you're doing and depending on what time of the day, it can be either nourishing or depleting, but it's rarely really neutral.
Yeah, and we'll actually get into that a little bit more of times of day and all of that.
And that's quite interesting. But in terms of a general like outlook on your day, what do you notice? And I'm asking you because I don't see the audience, but what do you notice about just the whole activity in general, and what do you notice about the balance between all these different activities? And I can perhaps share what I've noticed in myself.
Yeah. Why don't you share? I'm not sure. I'm thinking that like I might want to be adding more nourishing activities. Yeah. What are you thinking?
Yeah. First of all, I'm noticing that my typical day is kind of boring. I think a lot of it, and that's a judgment in itself, but I think a lot of it is work. A lot of my time is spent working. And so I can probably expand further in terms of like what my typical work day looks like, that 9 to 5. Generally speaking, when I tally up all of my neutral, depleting, or nourishing activities, I find that I have, well, I can just share it right now. I have 7 nourishing activities, 3 depleting, and 6 neutral. But a lot of the neutral activities I find are like things that I do mindlessly. And I was joking about this earlier, but it's actually quite something that I want to work on, is that when I eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner, like I feel like I'm eating it mindlessly and I'm like not really enjoying my food. So it feels neutral because I'm just kind of eating for calories. And on a typical work day when I'm busy, I find that I'm just like eating a lot, or I'm eating like 2 meals a day rather than like breaking it down, right? And I think Alessia will be talking about what that looks like and how we can, how we can tackle that issue when we were reading this article together. But I find that a lot of my neutral activities were actually the things I do like mindlessly or passively. Like even watching TV, I don't find that as something that's nourishing, or I don't find that relaxing. I just find that kind of like neutral. So in a way, I'm like equating neutral with like zoning out or like dissociating, or just just being a vegetable after a long day of work. But it is encouraging to see a lot of nourishing activities though, which is quite nice. Yeah, that's what I've noticed in this activity, at least.
Yeah, so we'd encourage you to take a moment to just reflect on your day, and if there's anything you want to change or things maybe you can't change, and that's okay. We're coming at this with no judgment, just trying to notice, and where we can make changes, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the premise of this webinar is to focus on energy boosting rather than managing our time, because the issue with time management is that time is a finite resource. So a lot of the time when you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't have time for self-care, to spend time with friends, or to take breaks, That's because you probably don't. So instead of approaching it from a time management perspective, what the newer research is coming out and saying is that we can approach it from an energy management perspective. So that's what we're going to be gearing this presentation towards today.
And Alessia, can you sort of just describe what, where we're getting this information from?
Yes. So Schwartz and McCarthy, they are two researchers that published with the Harvard Business Review. This is a lot of the information in our presentation today is going to be coming from that. I found this article fascinating, and I've been passing it along to some friends and colleagues, and they've kind of found the same thing. So we wanted to share this information with all of you. So that's where we're basing this off of today.
Yeah, and I think this is particularly helpful because a lot of the research that was done with, in this article was with executives and high-level business associates or high-level business people. So this may or may not apply to you in whatever capacity you work at, but we certainly, when we share these with our colleagues, we find that it was quite helpful in terms of talking about managing our energy rather than managing our time. So when we talk about managing our energy, we're going to look at three different things here. We're going to look at our physical energy, so distinguishing our physical from everything else. Like, how do we take care of our body? And then we're going to look at our emotions as well, because our emotions play a huge role in our typical day-to-day, and how can we sort of deal with our emotions and that ebb and flow, those ups and downs that just naturally occurred throughout our day. So the quality of that energy. And then lastly, we're going to look at the mind. So the focus of energy. So how can we reduce this multitasking myth? And we're going to talk about why it's a myth, but how can we tackle, a lot of these different duties and a lot of tasks in a mindful way. And I'm trying not to give too much away, but we'll touch on that later too.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a physical energy check. So this might align a little bit with the previous activity that we did. So just we'll go through these statements and check off whether or not they apply to you. So number one, I don't regularly get at least 7 hours of sleep, or I often wake up feeling tired. So research shows some mixed messages here, that 7+ hours of sleep is typically the kind of best amount, but there are some people that don't need that much. So look at it more as, do you wake up feeling tired, and does that tiredness follow you throughout the day? Next, I frequently skip meals, or I settle for something that isn't nutritious. I don't work out as much as I want to, or as much as you feel that you need for your own body to be able to feel energized and restored. And I don't take regular breaks during the day to truly renew and recharge. And this could be maybe you don't have the time or the capacity, but just checking in as to whether or not these statements apply to you.
So how can we increase our physical energy? One of the things that Alessia mentioned earlier is sleep. So like she said, there's mixed messages about how much sleep we get. It's not really about how much sleep we're getting, but what matters most is the quality of sleep we're getting. There's a really interesting book that recently came out called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. And he talks a lot about how it's important to get restful sleep. And there's many ways you can tackle that issue, but we're not going to get into it too much today. But just the main message that we want to highlight is that looking at the quality of your sleep, and one of the ways we can do that is to make it more consistent. So going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time. That might be really hard for people who have very, very different schedules throughout the day because of work. But once we get that consistent sleep schedule, that can increase our quality of sleep. That's just one thing. There's many other things that you can work at or improve when it comes to sleep.
And sleep is directly correlated with the energy that we have throughout the day.
Yeah.
So check in with that. I was thinking too about if you're noticing that your sleep is disturbed and you're feeling really tired, even like something like going for a sleep study or having a partner check in with how you're sleeping at night, that could be really tied to the physical energy that you're experiencing.
Yeah, and it could also be a good wake-up call, or in terms of like how much stress you're holding throughout the day. I just remember when I start getting like dreams about work, that's when I know, okay, I need to sort of, that's a red flag. When I start dreaming about work and I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, like I was working in my sleep. That's ridiculous. That could be a really interesting, I'm going to say interesting. I'm going to use the word interesting. It could be an interesting red flag in terms of like how you want to structure your day and how you want to structure your energy consumption.
One thing I wanted to add too was, so in this research that they did, they were working with these executives, and so where these recommendations come from is they started to implement these strategies with the executives to find out what was helpful. And yeah, they found 7 to 8 hours per night actually increased the energy of their participants significantly. So, and that kind of goes for all of the recommendations that we're going to be providing. They come from this study.
Now, as I'm reading this slide, you know, a lot of these you might already know about, and it might not be new information, but I think it's really important to just remind ourselves from time and time again that sleep, nutrition, and exercise are really important things, especially with increasing your physical energy. Because if we take care of our body, then we're also taking care of the rest of the other things that we talked about earlier, which is our mind and our emotions and who we are in general. So getting regular exercise and breaking down, even if you don't have to walk with that 20-minute daily exercise, but you can break it down throughout your day, and making sure you get enough sunlight, which is interesting because it was raining for the past week, but making sure you're getting enough sunlight because it triggers your brain so that you can get adequate sleep at night. And that's something that Matthew Walker talks about too, which I'm not going to go too much into here. Nutrition, like I said before, I tend to eat like 3 large meals throughout the day. And what you want to actually do is you want to eat lighter meals and some snacks throughout the day. And it's important to also look at what those snacks are. So if you're gorging on like chips, or if you're gorging on like junk food, that might be, you know, that might not be the best thing to do in terms of increasing your physical energy. And the reason why we want to have smaller meals throughout the day is because it actually stabilizes our glucose levels throughout the day. You're avoiding these peaks and valleys. So using myself as an example, if I eat a large brunch, my glucose level will spike, and then I'd have to wait for it to crash, and then I'm like starving when I eat the next one, and then it's just basically 2 mountains. You don't want to do that. So you want to have like just smaller, you know, stabilized glucose levels throughout the day.
So another big part of increasing physical energy is taking breaks. So there's this concept of ultradian rhythms, which are the natural rhythm that our body goes into throughout the day, which is 90 to 100 minutes of energy, followed by a resting state. And in that resting state, you might notice restlessness, hunger, you might notice that you're yawning, that you're having difficulty concentrating. So the key is that we need to listen to our bodies in these states and give ourselves a break. Most of us don't. And so when we don't, then our body just continues to burn out as the day goes on instead of becoming renewed. So the theory here is to take intermittent breaks for renewal, and they don't have to be long. So the quality of the break is a lot more important than the quantity of time. Renewal can actually occur in as little as several minutes, as long as you're fully disengaging from work to some extent, as much as you can. So what could that look like? Maybe talking to a colleague about something other than work, listening to music on an iPod, going for a walk, just walking up and down the stairs of the building. You could do a mindful meditation where your doors are closed, headphones are in, just anything where you're having that kind of physical and mental detachment from work. And it could just be as long as like 3 minutes. And then they found that going back to work after that, energy was renewed and increased, and then productivity was up throughout the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, you know, when Alessia and I were seeing clients throughout COVID, majority of it was over telehealth. And speaking for myself, some of the clients that I've been seeing who have been working from home have been finding it very difficult to focus and stay on track with work. And what's been helpful for them, and also honestly for myself, is to have these rituals in place. So every, it says 90 minutes, my mind can only really take 20 minutes, really realistically. So every 20 minutes or so, I disengage from whatever I'm doing, and I call a friend, call a family member for like 5 minutes, or I go outside and get some fresh air and go for a walk. Back in March, that was quite scary. We're going for a walk in the peak of COVID, but these are like sort of habits and rituals that have stuck with me, and it's stuck with a lot of people throughout during COVID, and then also afterwards, and it can be quite beneficial. So making sure that you have these rituals, you know, set in place, and figuring out what works for you, right? It could be just like a 3-minute meditation in a different room that's not where you're working. Or if you're working at the hospital, it could be going up and down the stairs, or going outside if you can, and just getting that fresh air.
I think that's a great point, is noticing what's actually nourishing, right? Because what's nourishing for you might not be nourishing for me. And so that's, I think, why it's good to reflect on like, okay, I'm taking this break, but I'm not finding that I'm energized afterwards. Is it because for me, that thing wasn't actually nourishing?
Yeah.
Tying it back to the beginning.
I like that, because when I'm looking at my my activity sheet, I find that the walks that I do in between and interspersed throughout the workday is nourishing. And they can be as easy, like it's as short as like 10 minutes. Sometimes I take out the trash, and then when I take out the trash, I like walk around the building, and then I come back. So when it comes to increasing resilience, oftentimes we look at stress as all bad, but sometimes stress can also give us the opportunity to increase our resilience. And this is something that a psychologist named Elizabeth Stanley has described in her program, in her therapy. She works with first responders and also military personnel, and dealing with stress, high stress environment, high stress jobs, and how can we effectively increase our resilience throughout the day. So this little oversimplified formula, I'm gonna try to describe it, is our way of increasing resilience. So when you have stress, whether it's good or whether it's bad, you wanna pair it with equal amounts of recovery. And that's how you increase resilience. So how does that look like? So let's say you're at baseline, you're at the green zone, and something causes you significant stress. Now, when I say significant stress, I'm not talking about like trauma, because this graph would be extremely different if it is. But let's just say significant stress, like a conflict at work, or reading an angry email, or something just happened that just pushed you a little bit further out of your window of tolerance of your stress level, or something that's just like, that feels yucky. What you want to do is you want to actually give yourself enough time to effectively recover. Now, again, based off what Alessia said earlier, it's not really about the time, but it's the quality of the recovery phase. It's a quality for which you allow yourself to recover. So that could mean looking at your physical energy, working on your emotions, or working on your focus energy, which we're going to touch on later too. So this is a diagram that shows how can we increase resilience as a result of stress. And I want to encourage you to look at stress not in terms of just the bad stress. It could also mean good stress. So look at that and then look at what strategies can I implement to effectively recover. Now, what happens if I don't let myself recover from that significant stress? For example, I minimize it. I say, you know what, that wasn't that stressful, or you know what, that's just part of the job. Or what else statements have people said, Alessia?
Well, if you don't let yourself recover, maybe because you don't have the opportunity, another stressful situation comes up. Yeah, that could also be another thing.
Exactly. So it like piles on. And you don't allow yourself to effectively recover. You don't buy yourself some time to manage your emotions, or you don't talk about it with someone. So that means that when you stop your recovery phase abruptly, your new baseline is going to be much higher than when it was in the green zone. That means that when there's another stress, like a stressful event that happens, it's going to take you out of your zone of tolerance way easier and way quicker than it did previously. Now, this is a very oversimplified diagram, like I said earlier, but you can see how this might add up over time. And we start experiencing stress from the most minor things. And perhaps we go home and we feel irritable. We feel like anything sets us off. And this explains why. It's because we don't allow ourselves to effectively and fully recover from each individual stress throughout the day. Does that make sense, Alessia, or is there anything else you would like to add?
No, that's pretty clear to me. I was also thinking if people do have questions, we'll have a question period at the end that you can pop it in the chat. So just feel free to jot it down and we'll get to them.
Yeah. And if you're interested, the YouTube video is called Optimizing the Caveman Within Us by Elizabeth Stanley, and it's a TEDx. She also has a book called Widening the Window, and she has a lot of research in terms of how to effectively recover from stress and high stress jobs.
So another way to leave work at work and kind of have that time at home where we experience increased energy can be to do a visualization. So over the past few months, I've learned a couple techniques in order to help me leave work at work. And one of them looks like as you're leaving your place of work. So let's say it's the hospital. You've had a stressful day. You know that you're going to go home and your mind's going to be spinning. As you leave and as you're walking out, visualizing leaving the stressful situations in each room as you pass it and closing that door. So visualizing that door close. And as you leave, you're doing this over and over again until you leave the hospital doors, you walk out and you visualize those doors closing behind you and even saying, I'm now out of my job and I'm going home. So it's a small technique. And again, certain things work for some people better than others, but give it a try and see if this helps a little bit.
And how do you do that with other things other than the hospital, Alessia? Like what other ways can you visualize?
Thinking
in any
other jobs?
Yeah, other jobs or other situations.
Let's say you work in an office, I would do the same thing. If you picture that angry email, just picture like throwing it in the room and closing the door behind you and really just trying to make that physical separation for yourself. Some days it will be easier than others. But yeah, give it a try.
Yeah, I think, because after hearing you talk about that, and that's something that I do as well that I find effective. But I think the important thing about visualization or leaving work behind is setting an intention, right? That's really what you're trying to do. You're setting an intention and you're allowing yourself to leave work behind. The intention meaning that I'm reminding myself that I'm going home. And whenever you see a doorway or whenever you see a visual cue or sound cue or whatever stimulus that reminds you of that intention, that's what this is. So I remember when Alessia told me about this technique or this way of visualizing and leaving your work at home, every time I see a doorway, that thing just triggers my mind automatically, like that thought. It's like, okay, I need to leave work behind. Okay, all right, now I'm finally out of the door. Let's go get some coffee, or let's go hang out with some people. But yeah, so I find that really helpful, so thanks. The other thing that we talked about too was how do we check in with our emotions. So I want to give you guys a moment here and read what's on the slide and see which statements apply to you. So if you find yourself feeling irritable, impatient, or anxious at work, especially when work is demanding, it might look like your graph looks like this. It's up. It's been going up for a while, and your window of tolerance has been going lower and lower, getting lower and lower. I don't have time with my family and loved ones, and when I'm with them, I'm not really with them. I'm not fully present, and I find myself on my phone or I find myself thinking about work. That could be a thing to check in on yourself with, like what emotions are coming up for me, and why is that? Why can't I be present in this moment right now? This is pretty this is pretty relevant right now. I have too little time for the activities that I deeply enjoy. This is where that activity at the beginning can be quite helpful, because when you check in with yourself, what are those activities that nourish me, right? For myself, like I said earlier, is going to the gym. And so that's an activity I deeply enjoy, and it gives me energy. It gives me emotional energy. It also gives me physical energy too. And I find myself, I don't stop frequently enough to express my appreciation to others or savor the accomplishments and blessings. This is a very short list, but there's many other things that you can ask yourself to check in with your emotions, check in with your general well-being. And if any of these apply to you, these strategies that we look at in the next slide might be helpful. So one of the many ways to increase emotional energy is, first off, increasing our awareness to our emotions. And that could be as simple as taking a step back, observing what's going on for you in that moment, really observing, especially observing what body sensations are coming up for you. So if you're anxious, if you're feeling anxious, and you notice that whenever you feel anxious, you start to, grit your teeth, or your shoulders start to, cave in like this, then that's one way of saying, okay, I'm anxious. That's one way to increase your awareness to your emotions, is really getting in the body and figuring out, how am I feeling right now? What's going on for me in this moment? And that might not happen right away, but the more you practice increasing your awareness with your emotions, the more you're able to increase your emotional energy over time. Anything to add to that point, Alessia?
Nope, I think you covered it.
Yeah. Another concept as well is that, as many of us know, emotions come and go, right? There's a bit of research, and I don't know, the research is a bit mixed on this particular topic, but usually emotions such as anger or sadness, or that just emotion, not mood, but emotion, last about 2 to 15 minutes. I'm gonna say 2 minutes. So what you want to do is you want to buy yourself some time to let that emotion come and go. One of the ways to do that is deep breathing. So when you're deep breathing, you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system. One of the ways to effectively do that is to lengthen your exhale in comparison to your inhale. That's a yoga technique. And so when you're noticing, oh my God, like I'm stressed, or like my shoulders are tense and like I'm gritting my teeth and I'm noticing some tightness in my chest area. So opening that up and breathing out all of that anxiety, and then breathing in and then breathing out some more. And doing that so that you're buying yourself some time. You're allowing that emotion to be there, and also letting it go at the same time, or later on as well. Another thing as well is expressing gratitude throughout the day. Oftentimes when we're feeling distressed, we're ignoring the positive qualities throughout our day. We're ignoring some of the things that make us feel grateful, happy, and nourished. So expressing gratitude throughout the day can look like many things. It can be just connecting with your friends or family, or looking at things that make you happy. Hopefully not the news too much, but just like happy stories, and expressing gratitude in whatever way you can, and be as creative as you possibly can with this. And also finding a way to make it a ritual for yourself. Another thing as well is oftentimes we get stuck in this narrative of I'm stressed, I don't have enough time, there's nothing that I can do. What else is there? I just don't have enough time. Like that's the one thing that rings in my ear. Anything else? Unless
Yeah, or let's say like in a conflict,
yeah,
where you might be blaming the other person, or
right.
really like, woe is me, and people are against me. And it might really feel like that because having strong emotions really makes us look for all of the cues that signal that there is danger out there, that there is negativity. And so it's not that it's your fault, but actually trying to work against that instinct to blame, or to shame yourself, or to stick within that narrative, I think can then start to reverse the process a little bit.
Yeah. And so let's use that sort of as an example. Like, let's say there's conflict at work. You want to be able to change your perspective, change your lenses on how do you view this conflict and how can I effectively deal with it. So you can use the reverse lens on your camera, and ask yourself, what would the other person in this conflict say in this situation, and what ways might that be true? So you're putting yourself in their shoes, and sort of seeing it in that way, so that
And research has actually found that putting yourself in their shoes can decrease the emotional intensity that you feel pretty quickly.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how all these researches comes up and how relevant it is. Yeah, yeah, we can nerd out about that all day. Or you can change the lens in a different way and think about, you can use your long lens, and ask yourself, well, how will I most likely view the situation in 6 months' time, in a year's time, when I'm a different person and I'm looking back? How would I want to view the situation? How would I most likely view the situation? You can change your lens one more time and look at wide lens and ask yourself, regardless of the outcome of this issue, how can I learn and grow from it? What can I take away where I can effectively recover from stress and also increase my resilience to this particular conflict, interpersonal or work-related, whatever it may mean for you. So it's all about the intentionality of increasing your emotional energy, and finding ways to increase more positive emotions by expressing gratitude and changing the narrative.
And our webinar next week is actually going to focus on emotions and managing emotions in the workplace, and how to validate our own emotions while also making some changes that are beneficial in the long run.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about emotional energy, I think it's really important that we talk about the fight or flight reflex. This is something that I'm sure you've heard the term before. It's a mechanism that we've evolved to have in order to keep us safe as humans. And most animals also have this reflex. So when the reflex isn't engaged, when we're feeling safe and we're feeling calm and we're in rest mode, essentially, that's where we're here. And this is where we're able to feel joy, where we're able to be in the present moment, where we feel grounded, we can connect with others, we feel safe, we're aware of the environment around us, there's curiosity, openness, we can easily feel compassion for others, and we can more easily be mindful. So when we're in this mode, it's the parasympathetic nervous system that's engaged. So like Chad was saying, when we breathe out, we actually start to engage this nervous system, which is why we start to feel calmer. So what's the parasympathetic nervous system for? I'm sure you've heard this before. We'll just touch on it briefly. So digestion, it's also called the rest and digest reflex, better immune response, better ability to rest and recuperate. So keeping our graph kind of going back down. The ability to relate and connect to others. And we decrease our defensive responses when we're in this mode. Now, let's say that the fight or flight mode fight or flight reflex gets activated. So this means we perceive danger. And it might not be something that could actually kill us, but we perceive it as dangerous. So maybe it's a colleague yelling at us or sending an angry email. Maybe we feel like we've messed something up at work and we feel that we'll lose the respect of our colleagues. Anything like that can put us into the fight or flight mode. So what does this look like? Flight is more of that escape, leave the situation. So there's panic, fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. Whereas flight is you move more towards the situation. That's where there's rage, anger, irritation, and frustration. And it's important to remember that there's still kind of an I can do something about the situation, feel to this reflex. And this is when the sympathetic nervous system is engaged. And so what happens when we're in fight or flight mode? Well, our blood pressure goes up. The adrenaline goes to the big muscles in our body. We've got oxygen circulating to vital organs, and decreased digestion, decreased ability to relate. Our body's really just kind of coming together to keep us alive. So this is good if we're in danger. What happens though is that our body can get into this fight or flight mode very quickly if stressors persist. And then what we end up seeing is issues with digestion. We end up seeing issues with circulation, blood pressure, etc. And so if we're noticing that this is happening, we want to try to decrease it in some way, which is why managing emotional energy is so important. The more extreme end of this is the freeze response. And this is where the body feels totally trapped, cannot move. And that's where dissociation, numbness, depression, feeling helpless, shut down, and hopeless comes into play. This actually comes through the dorsal vagal nerve. And so this is an actually completely different response in the body. If you're noticing the freeze mode more often, this is another kind of clue to check in, try to either get some self-care in, whether that's taking some days off of work, whether it's seeing a therapist, just checking in with what you need if you're noticing that you're going into these modes more easily. Chad, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, think about like Elizabeth Stanley's graph or like that work that she's done, and think about what happens if I don't let myself effectively recover. We're gonna face multiple stressors throughout the day, and so what a healthy, that's a judgment. what an ideal graph looks like for you is that up and down, up and down. It's easily for you to get to that social engagement, that parasympathetic nervous system mode. And so that's how we actually increase our resilience to it. But when you start noticing freeze responses as sort of like a default thing that happens whenever you experience stress, that's something that is a red flag, and perhaps, you know, you might want to talk to someone about that, a trusted friend or family or therapist or whoever you feel comfortable sharing that with. So when it comes to maintaining our focus, when it comes to maintaining our concentration, our attention, we want to look at our mental energy. So here's a mental energy check, similar to the emotion energy check. And here are some statements that may or may not apply to you. So difficulty focusing on one thing at a time, super distracted throughout the day. And I'm finding it really difficult to attend to conversations, especially with loved ones, family members, at the end of the work shift, at the end, like when I get home. That's something that may or may not apply to you, but that's something to look at in terms of like, what's my mental energy look like? Procrastinating on a lot of important tasks or leaving tasks until the last minute, having no time or not enough time for reflection, creative thinking, or strategizing. I work in the evenings or on weekends, and I almost never take an email-free vacation. That's a huge red flag. If you go on vacation, leave everything behind. You're on vacation, and treat yourself. I avoid tasks that require concentration. That goes very much hand in hand with procrastinating. Or perhaps you're having difficulty concentrating, and so your body is literally telling you to avoid that activity because you need to rest. So if you're finding that it's hard for you to concentrate and you're avoiding things that require concentration, maybe that's a sign that I need to look at what my energy levels look like, what my mental energy looks like, and how can I effectively recover from that stressor. And then lastly, I've been having trouble listening to and following instructions. Depending on the day or depending on the activity, this could be very important. If that instruction is something that, you know, that's part of your job or part of your education, and if you're finding that that's impacting your work or impacting your schooling, then that's something that you might have to look at in terms of mental health or mental energy check. Anything else to add here, Leslie?
Nope.
Cool. So I mentioned earlier that multitasking is a myth, and it really is a myth. What we're really doing when we're multitasking is we're doing it so quickly sometimes that it feels like we're doing multiple things at the same time. But we're actually doing what we call cognitive switching. We're switching, our minds are so good at doing that it feels like we're doing all these tasks all at the same time. But instead, what our minds are actually doing is it switches from task to task. And we call that cognitive switching. As much as possible, you want to limit that feeling of multitasking. So this is where a strategy of being mindful in the moment, doing one thing mindfully in the moment is very helpful. So some of the examples that Schwartz and McCarthy gave is all these executives who would be in meetings, like they would be scheduled for a 1-hour meeting, but they would take phone calls in between, like during that meeting. So they would take phone calls, or they would answer emails, or they interrupt the person that in front of and answer an email or take a call. And that 1-hour meeting ends up being 2 hours, and it doesn't feel as productive as if I just paid attention to this one person without any sort of feeling of multitasking, and then leave all of that stuff at the end of the meeting. I don't know how that might look like for you in your day-to-day work, but I think this is really important to distinguish whether is this really effective in that situation, in this situation right now? Is me being with this person, but I'm also thinking about multiple other things to do, is that really helping me be present, helping me increase my mental energy? So that's something that I encourage you to reflect on, which might be extremely difficult, and it might bring up difficult emotions or feelings or thoughts, when you're put in this job that you have to multitask, you have to do all these things, and there's a billion things happening all at once. Anything to add to that part, Alessia?
Yeah, I would say that like sometimes it isn't possible, but trying to limit it wherever it is possible. So, for example, watching TV while also being on your phone. While we think we're, doing all sorts of things at the same time, we're actually draining our energy. And we know that multitasking doesn't really work. We end up doing both tasks less well. So better to try to do one thing at once. And what they found in this article was that once multitasking kind of got limited, the executives ended up being way more productive at work. And that looked like, for example, shutting off the phone during a meeting so that you're not getting text messages during a meeting. It looked like if you needed to finish a task where you really have to focus, going into another room, closing the door, not answering emails, not answering phone calls. So however that would look like for you, and wherever possible, it can be helpful in terms of increasing mental energy.
Thanks, Alessia. Yeah, I often defer to Alessia when it comes to this topic because she's an expert in ADHD. And so a lot of times people with ADHD find that it's hard to concentrate, it's hard to pay attention to things because multitasking. So a lot of good research on that, and maybe Alessia can share more information in our discussion session. So we talked about emails and work-related notifications. Another thing that Alessia brought up that reminded me of, topic is it might be really hard for you to limit multitasking at work. And so you want to be able to build up this practice. So try to do that outside of work too. So if I'm cooking, I'm just cooking. I'm not watching. That's hypocritical because I actually do watch TV, but I try as much as possible to just cook. Enjoy what I'm cooking. Perhaps I'm listening to music in the background, or if I'm reading a book, I'm just reading a book and I put my phone in the other room so that I'm paying attention to that book. So having these rituals and like holding yourself accountable to do these things outside of work can really help us when we're at work, when it's more difficult to do that. We talked about ultradian rhythms, but we're also but there's another concept called ultradian sprints, which means that we can really only focus our mental energy for an hour and a half to 2 hours at a time. For me, it's like half an hour to an hour, so a lot shorter. So take a true break when you notice that your concentration is diminishing, you're noticing that, okay, that 20 minutes is up or that 90 minutes is up. This is usually the time when I can't focus anymore. So take a true break. That means leave everything behind, go for a walk, or do that one thing mindfully in the moment, that one thing mindfully in the moment, and not try to limit as much as possible multitasking, and then focus on the next activity. And then the next point here is mindfulness practice. So like I said earlier, is you want to be able to build this muscle of noticing, allowing, and recognizing, and also finding ways to nourish yourself. And one of the ways you can do that is having a ritual or practice, a mindfulness practice. That could mean 3 minutes of meditation every morning, or if meditation is not your thing, going for like a mindful walk. So going for a walk and leaving all of your stuff behind, or listening to a favorite song of yours while you're going for a walk. Whatever that may mean for you. I know this topic of mindfulness is a huge catchword or pantheon of all different strategies, but figuring out what's working for you right now and figuring out what's not working for you, and try to assess and strategize what a good ritual looks like for you, a good practice. The point is being able to recognize what's coming up for you in the moment, allowing it to come out, and investigating what's going on in your body, like what emotion is this? And then once you learn what it is, nourish yourself, finding a way to finding a behavior or a practice that is nourishing for you. So that's one of multiple ways of increasing your mental energy.
And I think too, the reason that mindfulness practice can contribute to an increase in mental energy is because when we're trying to push away emotions or when we're trying to ignore things that are coming up for us, that actually takes a lot of energy. And sometimes if we can take a second to acknowledge, oh, that was stressful, or, that email really hurt me or made me upset, just to take that moment, validate yourself, it's a lot easier to move on with your day rather than shutting it down, because that really adds up in terms of mental energy. So,
oh yeah, that's the last one.
I was gonna say, yeah, we're gonna actually do a short mindfulness practice together, and then we'll open it up for questions for the remainder of the time.
Okay, so if at any point, so Alessia and I are going to do this with you. So we're going to leave our cameras on, and then it might be like 5 minutes, and then we'll leave the rest for discussion on the chat function.
Yeah.
Okay. So at this point, I want you to find a posture that you find relaxing, and if you're sitting, sitting with your back straight, and your legs both planted on the floor, feet both planted on the floor. You could be lying down, whatever feels comfortable for you. And as you're settling into this posture, as you're settling into this chosen posture that you have, I want you to just check in with yourself. And if it's easier for you to check in with yourself, closing your eyes or lowering your gaze. Noticing what you're feeling, and taking a scan from your head to your toe. What's coming up for you right now? Taking stock of the sensations that arise and fall. Noticing the sounds in the room. The smells. Whatever comes up, allowing it to rest in your awareness. Noticing what's going on for you in your body. The subtle vibrations, the stillness. Areas where you might feel tense, or areas that you might feel relaxed. Noticing it with gentle curiosity. And whenever you're ready, gathering up all of that attention and placing it gently on your breath. Allowing the natural rhythm of the breath to come in and out without the need to change them. Noticing your body rise and fall with each inhale and exhale. And allowing your breath to be the anchor for your attention. You may notice that your mind wanders from time to time, and that's okay. Whenever you notice your mind wander, acknowledge it and gently bringing it back to your focused attention on your breath. And whenever you're ready, again, gathering up all of that attention and bringing it to your body, doing a scan from head to toe, noticing, describing what's going on for you in this moment. And remembering that you can take this purposeful way of attending throughout your day-to-day. This idea of recognizing, allowing, feeling curious, and nourishing yourself. At this point, whenever you're ready, introducing a bit of movement throughout your body, perhaps wiggling your toes, moving your shoulders from side to side, and slowly and gently bringing your attention back to the Zoom meeting, opening your eyes when you're ready. Cool. That's recorded, so for anyone who want to keep I'm clearly still waking up. For anyone who wants to, for everyone who wants more mindfulness exercises, we'll probably go through more of that throughout our webinar series. But right now we're going to leave it all out for questions. So feel free to leave some questions in the chat function, and Alessia and I will try to do our best to answer them as honestly as possible. For anyone who's interested, the article is from the Harvard Business Review, and I forgot what the title is called, but let me research it.
I missed putting that in, sorry.
That's okay. It's called Manage Your Energy, Not Your Time. That's a really, really important thing to distinguish, is that we all probably don't have time, but that's not what we're trying to help you do. We're trying to help you manage your energy.